So now that the front end and the back end are both ready, it's time to make them communicate with each other. I've used Axios for fetching data and make it perform the CRUD operations to the backend, which has access to the database. So I will go through each of the 4 basic operations, and if they work, then the web app is able to do the task it was created for. And at the very end, I'm going to show what to do with the source code on GitHub if somebody wants to try this out. At the end of the previous episode, I fetched data from the JSON placeholder website using the fetch method, and after I got the response, I had to convert it to JSON format, and then with the setUser method, I set that JSON as the value of the user state. For fetching data from my MongoDB database, instead of the fetch API, I'm going to use the HTTP client called Axios, which does the conversion to JSON automatically, so I can skip this response.json step. Let me install it with npm install Axios. I'm installing it in the root folder and not in the frontend folder, then wait until it finishes, and then back in the fruit list component, I import Axios from Axios, and then right after receiving the data from the server, I can use the response.data as the argument for the set user. Then I can see in the browser that the name of the first user is still displayed there. Now if I want to fetch data from the database instead of this JSON placeholder, I need to send the GET request to my local server. It's supposed to listen on port 5000, and as you might remember, the list of the fruits can be reached at the /API/fruits endpoint. Now it would be reasonable to run frontend and backend in the same time. Back then in the first 2 episodes, the way I started the server was going into the root folder and typing npm run server. And I could try that, npm run server in one terminal and npm start in another one from the frontend folder. And then if I go to the browser and keep my eyes on the developer tools, here I can see that I have a so-called CORS, cross-origin resource sharing policy problem, which prevents JavaScript from making requests across domain boundaries. To solve that problem, I need to add a proxy and set it to look at localhost 5000. So I stop both client and server, and I go to the package.json inside of the frontend folder, not the one in the root folder, and proxy 127.0.0.1, which is the IP address of the localhost. And after that, I don't need to specify the whole URL when I'm making an HTTP request. I can simply do /API/fruits. The proxy will know the first part. Now this CORS problem is solved, but before restarting the frontend and the backend, there is a way to start them with one single command instead of running them in 2 separate terminals, which is convenient, but I need to download one more npm package for that called concurrently. So npm install concurrently. I think this will be the last npm package I install. And if I go to the package.json file in the root directory, this time not the one in the front end, which I used for the proxy, but the other one, I can add a few new scripts. I already have one for the server that runs if I type npm run server. Now I create one for the client as well. Client npm start -- prefix frontend, because it will run from the frontend folder. And to combine these two in a so-called dev script, on the website of the concurrently package, I can see how to use it in the package.json. I copy this line of code, paste it as a script, and I set the first argument to npm run server and the second one to npm run client. And now if I type npm run dev in the terminal, the server and the client will start together. After this, if I change the code on the server and save, the nodemon will restart the server for me. And if I change the code in the front end and save, I can see the changes after refreshing the browser. So I don't need to bother with those anymore. And now, after downloading Axios, setting the proxy, and running the server and the client simultaneously with concurrently, it's finally time to implement the CRUD operations. So the GET request for all the fruits, that's already done. I just used the same code that I commented out in the last episode. And I also add the amount and the info to have everything on the screen. Now that frontend and backend are both running, the frontend is sending an HTTP GET request with Axios on the /API/fruits endpoint of the backend. And then by using the mongoose method find, The server gets all the fruits infos and sends them back to the front end in a JSON file as an HTTP response. And in the JSX, I define the way I want the users to be rendered, and that's what I can see in the browser now. Then moving on to the post request, which I want to happen in the add_fruit component. I want to send the post request inside of the handle submit function, because that's the function that runs when I click on the submit button. In the last episode, I managed to console.log out the fruit details entered by the user, and I'm going to use these same variables. The post method has two parameters. The first is where do I want to send the data. That's the /API/fruits endpoint, because that's what I set in the backend in the first episode. And the second parameter is what do I want to send. That would be a new object called new fruit that I'm creating above. It will have a name, an amount, and an info property. And I can add the then, meaning that once I get the response from the server, console.log the data property of the response object. In the browser, I add some new details, and before I send the message, I open localhost 5000 /API/fruits in the new tab. That's the backend endpoint. And then after adding a new fruit, I refresh the backend tab, and I should see that the list of the fruits has changed. And I add another fruit, E5EEE. Go to the backend again, and it has been added too. And now I can check the fruits list from the front end as well. When I click on the fruit list, I get all the 5 items that are currently in the database. Next, I'm going to get the data of just one specific fruit. And I want to grab that fruit by clicking on its name in the fruit list. So each of these names in the list will be links, for which I import link from React Router DOM in the fruit list component. In the app.js, I already have the fruit/column ID route attached to the edit fruit component. That means that I can simply wrap these fruits in a link to /fruit/fruit ID. Here I'm using template literals, so the expression has to go between backticks. And in the browser, if I click on this link, then I'm in the edit fruit component. And that means I have to go to the edit fruit component and define how do I want it to be rendered. I import Axios from Axios here as well, and also useState and useEffect, since I will call axios.get in a useEffect hook. The fruit object will be a state, which will get its value after the response from the server arrives. And to access to the ID, which is in the link, I set a much parameter here, and much params ID after the /API/fruits. And then the fruit variable will be set to response.data. The returning JSX will have an h1 tag saying editing fruit.name, since I will use this component for updating the fruit's data, and then a few more paragraphs displaying the properties of the specific fruit, including its ID. And then the names in the fruit list work as links to the detailed fruit page. If I click on one in the browser, then I should be able to see the h1 and the paragraphs. Okay, the reason I can't see anything is that in the backend route, I tried to find the fruit by ID in a wrong way. In the backend /routes/fruits.js in the router.getID, instead of this, I use the find by ID method, and the parameter will be rec.param.id. And let's see if that makes it better. And yeah, now it's displaying the details. Alright, let's move on to the put and the delete requests. Those will be called from this edit fruit page as well. For the update, I will use something like a form, for which I copy these lines from the add fruit and paste it in the JSX. And since it has a reference to the handle change function, I'm going to go and copy that function as well. I use a button at the end, for which first I import button from React Bootstrap. The class name of the button will be btm warning, which is part of Bootstrap, and the function that we run on click will be called fruit update. And that's the function where the put request will be. And I set the initial value of the fruit state to an object with blank data. As for the fruit update function, I use axios.put. Its first parameter is the backend endpoint defined by the ID of the fruit, and the second parameter is the fruit object that has been changing according to the user input. And then once again, then console.log fruit, and at the end of the function I add window.location equals /fruit list, which will redirect the browser to the fruit list so that I can quickly see if the change was successful or not. And I test it. If I click on this E5 and let's say I want it to be E15, then I can click on update fruit and see the new fruit list where the E5 is now E15. and that shows that the put request is working. And finally, I implement the delete request, which after finishing the put request doesn't require too much effort. I create another button next to the fruit update. This one will have the danger class and a function called fruit delete for on click. And I copy the fruit update function, rename it to fruit delete. There I call the Axios.delete, and its parameter will be /API/fruit/much param ID. And then this time I console.log the response status. And I leave the window location there, and that would be all for the delete. Let's test it in the browser as well. I click on this, which I don't want to have anymore. So I delete it. And if I look at the fruit list again, then that fruit is not on the list anymore. Okay, now I finished building a CRUD app with the MERN stack. It's fully functional in terms of creating, reading, updating, and deleting data from a MongoDB database, which itself is not really a big deal, but a simple CRUD app can serve as a starting point to actually build a real-world app. So feel free to use it. It's on GitHub, link is in the description. If you want to use this project, then clone the repository from GitHub, go to the root folder in the terminal, where the frontend and the backend folders are, and to install all the dependencies, the ones that are needed in the root and also in the frontend, type npm install and npm -- prefix frontend install. Yeah. And don't forget to change the connection URI into .env file. There you will need another password and another database name. And once that's done, you should be able to start this application with npm run dev. And that's it. Good luck and bye.